Thank you very much. As a special rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples, I have had the opportunity to visit communities where conflicts, long-standing conflicts have been happening. But I also come from the Philippines, where there has been a 50 years insurgency by the Communist Party of the Philippines. So I myself witnessed the situation of violence against women in situations of conflict. As mentioned by my colleagues, we indigenous women suffer disproportionately from the conflicts that are happening in their communities for several reasons. Usually, the military will use women as the instruments to quell any insurgency or resistance to the efforts of the state to control and to fight against the insurgency. The indigenous peoples are usually accused as supporting the insurgents, which is not surprising because these communities have been neglected totally by the state. And then when there are insurgents who come to the communities and they provide some of the basic social services that they need or address the issues of injustice against a landlord who has been despotic, then they sympathize and they align themselves with these insurgents. But that's really because of the need to address the pressing issues that they face. But in the process, they are accused as supporters of the insurgents, and that is when they suffer the most. Rape has been used as a common instrument to weaken the resistance of communities. And when the conflicts happen, the women are the ones who will stay in the community. In several communities I've been to, there are almost no men left. It's the women and children who are there. I remember when I went to Chiapas after the uprising in 1994, when we went to the villages, there were just women and children left in the community. And that is, and therefore, when the military comes to do the operations, the women are the ones who suffer the brunt of the ire of the military. I also have been to Guatemala, and I went to the trial of the Seporsarco widows. These are Maya women who have been raped by the military. Their husbands were killed first, they were raped by the military, and then they were made sexual slaves. And they filed a case against the military in this happened in 1982. It was only this year that finally the trial happened and the two military men were indicted, which for me is a very good victory, because at least it really has proven that the military has been involved in that horrid situation. And then I went to Colombia, where I spoke with the indigenous peoples regarding the ongoing peace agreements. And in that meeting, I talked with the Office of the High Commissioner in Human Rights, and they told me that in 2015 alone, there were 8 indigenous leaders killed and 78 indigenous leaders, 11 of whom are women who were victims of attacks. And during that same period, they were threatened by the paramilitary criminal gangs, and they are threatened because they were referred to as participating in indigenous mobilization, and they are leaders of they are supporting the insurgency, and therefore they are also terrorists. So the indigenous women are telling me that when the peace agreements are going to be agreed upon, of which indigenous peoples are out of the scene, they really fear the consequence on them. And one of the consequences that they fear is that the demobilized guerrillas are going to be brought into their communities again. And they feel that if these demobilized guerrillas will be brought there will be more violence against them. Their rights to their lands will be violated. And a conflict again will ensue, because many of these guerrillas also have been involved in killing some of their people. So this is the picture of conflicts, militarization, and the rights of indigenous women. And I certainly hope that in the peace agreements that are being developed, there should really be sections dedicated to addressing the concerns of indigenous peoples in general, but indigenous women and the children in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. The speakers will take some questions now. Yes. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Waldo from Prensa Latina. Just one question. What do you expect from this 15th session of the forum in terms of commitment, documents, or specific action? Thank you very much.
Thank you. With regard to this theme and the discussion we're holding, specifically access to justice for Indigenous women, as Indigenous peoples, but also as a member of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, as my colleague highlighted, the Special Rapporteur, Victoria Tauli, with regard to peace processes, we should have a clause that highlights the role of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous women. Because after having a look at the negative consequences on conflict on Indigenous women, it is important that Indigenous women participate in peace processes to make sure that these peace agreements are sustainable, but also to build the capabilities of Indigenous women. So we do have expectations. We do hope to make recommendations to make to member states and the UN so that we can reference in peace processes a clause referring to the role of women, Indigenous women.
Issues in relation to how conflicts and peace agreements are impacting on Indigenous women should be made more visible. And I am aware that, for instance, the UN Security Council is going to be involved in the peace agreements in Colombia for the demobilization of the armed groups. And there are various UN agencies that are going to be involved as well, the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights for that matter. Usually the UNDP comes and talks about development, post-conflict development. And I certainly would expect that the Permanent Forum will come up with recommendations for those bodies of the UN as well as the agencies to make sure that Indigenous women's issues will be dealt with, will be part of the agenda, and also that Indigenous women's issues related to access to justice will also be dealt with. Also, those who have been displaced, internally displaced from the communities because of the conflicts, that measures be taken by the bodies like the refugees body to really deal with these issues of Indigenous women. How will they get back their lands? How will they go and live peacefully in their lands and develop these lands to be to serve their peoples? And how will the issues of access? How will there be trials against those who are who have caused the rapes, who have done the rapes or done the violence against women? That can be undertaken. Will there be a Truth and Reconciliation Committee for councils where the issues of Indigenous women can be raised? And the solutions to what the Indigenous women face will also be addressed. There is a lot of things that I'd like to see from the Permanent Forum, but this is just the beginning. It has never been an issue that was addressed by the forum. It's not easy to get the states to support this issue, but I think that now it's out there, and so there should be much more recommendations to really deal with these issues.